1988, shortly after the Easy Company reunion in New Orleans, historian Stephen Ambrose began conducting some of his earliest in-depth interviews with members of Easy Company. Ambrose had originally come to gather stories for his upcoming book, but the conversation soon expanded into something much larger. What began as research gradually turned into the foundation for a full project devoted specifically to Easy Company of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment. At the reunion, Ambrose had already spoken briefly with Carwood Lipton, but the meeting that followed marked his first formal sit-down interview with William Wild Bill Garnier. In a letter Lipton later wrote to Richard Winters, he mentioned that the interview had included a heated argument between Ambrose and Garnier about a donation to the company's slush fund. The exchange never appeared in the transcript. Lipton also expressed frustration that Ambrose seemed more interested in the men's personal lives than in the story of the company itself. Ambrose, for his part, later told Winters that he had been disappointed with the meeting and felt he had gotten very little useful material from it. The uneasy conversation would foreshadow the many confrontations that would later occur between the historian and the veterans of Easy Company. As the discussion turned to training, Ambrose asked whether the battalion commander had stood before the men each morning at Camp Toccoa and announced that anyone who wished to leave could do so. The veterans said they did not recall such formal announcements. Everyone already understood the reality. Anyone who wanted to quit could leave at any time without making a public display of it. They did remember the infamous ceremony in which soldiers who failed or quit were drummed out. One man in particular remained vivid in their memory, Frank Rotello from Asheville, North Carolina. There had been several men who were forced out of the company, but Rotello stood out. The ceremony itself had been deeply unsettling. A man would be brought out in front of the unit while his insignia were cut from his uniform. With his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, he would march away to the sound of a muffled drum. The spectacle made a lasting impression on the men who watched it. Another soldier, Lou Zarella, had also left, and later joined the 82nd Airborne Division. Eventually, the conversation turned to promotions. Lipton recalled becoming a sergeant during the training period at Camp Toccoa and later at Camp McCall. While out on a field problem, his superior suddenly remembered the news and casually told him that he had been promoted. Later, he received the official certificate signed by Colonel Robert F. Sink. Despite Sink's importance as regimental commander, the enlisted men had almost no direct contact with him. Lipton remembered only one personal interaction. During training at Camp McCall, he developed a severe infection in his leg after a field exercise. During a weekend ceremony at the camp, which included a parachute jump demonstration, he struggled to walk because the infection had grown so painful. When he finally visited the first aid station, the doctor diagnosed acute cellulitis and warned that if it was not treated immediately, he might lose his leg. Lipton was told he would have to be sent to the hospital right away. Sink happened to be in the room and came over to speak with him. When Lipton explained that he had planned to spend the weekend with his wife, who lived nearby in Southern Pines, Sink asked the doctor if the hospital visit could wait a couple of days. The doctor insisted that the situation was too dangerous. Sink looked back at Lipton and simply said he had done what he could. The moment left a strong impression. Lipton felt that Sink genuinely cared about the men under his command. Another memory of Sink came from the brutal winter fighting around the Belgian town of Foy during the Battle of the Bulge. Easy Company had made a long attack through the snow and established defensive positions in nearby woods. During the night, Donald Hubler was killed. The next morning, the company expected hot food to arrive, but the supply truck had struck a mine and exploded, killing the men inside and destroying the rations. While Lipton walked back toward the company after learning the news, he saw Colonel Sink standing near a tree with several officers. Suddenly, an artillery shell screamed in and exploded nearby. Everyone else dove for cover. But when Lipton raised his head again, Sink was still standing calmly against the tree, as if nothing had happened. Ambrose asked if the colonel had ever been called Bourbon Bob. The men said they had never heard the nickname themselves, though they knew Sink enjoyed drinking. The conversation drifted to earlier training, including the long march to Atlanta that some later criticized as little more than a publicity stunt. The men remembered it differently. At the time, they had only recently joined the army, and the entire experience still felt like an adventure. They did not resent the march, even though it left some men with badly damaged feet. Compared with what they would endure later during the winter siege of Bastogne, the march seemed mild. When Easy Company was first formed, none of the enlisted men were professional soldiers. Only a small cadre had previous experience. 3 staff sergeants were present early on, And though the men assumed they had been regular army soldiers, they did not remain long. Many believed they would have been valuable in combat. Their original commander, Herbert Sobel, was believed to have come from the National Guard. When Ambrose asked about Sobel, the reactions were complex and emotional. Some veterans had warned Lipton that many men disliked Sobel and feared going into combat under him. Yet Lipton acknowledged that Sobel always led from the front during training. Whenever the men marched or ran, Sobel was right there with them, sharing the same misery he imposed. When Easy Company was created, Sobel was the company commander but only a first lieutenant. The formation of the company itself had no ceremony for the enlisted men. 4 of the first soldiers, Proconte, Anson, Sisk, and Lipton, were transferred from another unit. A corporal simply marched them to the barracks where Sobel introduced himself as their commander. Sergeant Moorhead placed them in a barracks and declared them the first platoon of Easy Company. Within days, more men arrived from the training company until the unit was filled. Then, somewhat arbitrarily, Moorhead informed them they were now the 3rd platoon instead. The change was purely logistical. Their barracks were located farther from the orderly room, but it made the original group feel as if they had joined last instead of first. Training quickly proved brutal. Roughly 30 men were eliminated before earning their parachute wings. Some failed physically, others mentally, and some both. A number were transferred rather than discharged, including many who went to the 82nd Airborne. Medical tests were constant, and physical standards were relentless. Anyone who fell out during the punishing runs up Mount Currahee faced Sobel's dawn patrol, which meant running the mountain again alone at 4 in the morning. There were no excuses and no sympathy. The goal was to build a unit where every man could depend on the others. Although Sobel was one of only a few Jewish men in the company during a time when racism was widespread in America, the veterans insisted that his religion had no influence on how they judged him. They judged him solely on his leadership. Many found him tough, determined, and often ridiculous. Some had little personal conflict with him, but others had serious confrontations. One incident involved a rare 3-day pass Sobel granted to the few soldiers who had never gone on sick call. Lipton had recently married and excitedly arranged to meet his wife in Atlanta. Before the weekend arrived, however, Sobel inspected the barracks while the company was away on a field problem. He canceled every pass after finding minor violations, including a pair of boots without laces. Lipton explained that he had removed the laces while shining the boots and had stuffed them inside to dry, but Sobel had already canceled the leave. The man's wife was already traveling to Atlanta, and he briefly considered going absent without leave to meet her. On the advice of a lieutenant, he instead confronted Sobel directly. After examining the laces and confirming they belonged to the boots, Sobel abruptly lifted the restriction. To many, Sobel's behavior seemed extreme, even sadistic. At times he screamed like a madman. Some believed he simply enjoyed putting men under pressure and watching them struggle. Others found him impossible to understand. Communication with him was nearly non-existent. Enlisted men rarely approached him directly, and when they did, it was usually through an officer. Sobel was known for humiliating officers as well as enlisted men. Instead of berating them publicly, he assigned them menial duties such as latrine inspection or kitchen detail, making it clear to everyone that even officers were not immune to his discipline. One respected platoon leader, Lieutenant Moore, fell out of favor after returning a few days late from his wedding despite sending a telegram explaining the delay. Sobel never forgave him. Moore was reassigned as mess officer and eventually transferred out of the company entirely. He later joined the Pathfinders and was eventually blinded by a grenade during the war. Another soldier named Connell also clashed with Sobel during an argument about discipline. When Connell insisted he was right, Sobel lectured him about obedience and the importance of following orders in combat. Connell bluntly replied that Sobel would never get help from him. Enraged, Sobel threw an expensive fountain pen on the floor and stomped on it, then told Connell that he had caused him to break it. Within weeks, Connell was transferred out. Despite these incidents, the men admitted Sobel was technically competent with weapons and training. The real problem, they believed, was that he needed total control of every situation. Combat, with its chaos and constant change, would have stripped him of that control. They believed he would have been helpless under real battlefield conditions. Sobel's leadership eventually led to open rebellion. Several non-commissioned officers, led by men like Salty Harris and Mike Ranney, drafted letters in their own handwriting stating that they were giving up their stripes and no longer wished to serve as NCOs under him. The letters were stacked in the orderly room for Sobel to find. Later that night, however, the men reconsidered and removed them before he saw them. The complaint ultimately reached higher command, and Colonel Sink summoned the NCOs. Furious, he warned them that their actions amounted to mutiny and could have led to severe punishment. Yet within a few weeks, Sobel was transferred out of Easy Company. The men believed their rebellion had likely saved Sobel's life. Instead of going into combat with Easy Company, he was reassigned to training duties at a parachute school, where his strict discipline was more suited. The last time Lipton saw him was in March 1945 during a divisional formation in France. Sobel marched up to salute Winters, who by then outranked him, asked a question, and marched away again. The look of triumph on Winters' face as Sobel saluted him was something Lipton said he would never forget. Sobel's later life ended tragically. His family reportedly felt bitterness about how he had been portrayed by the men of Easy Company. Years after the war, Lipton contacted Sobel's sister and learned that he had attempted suicide and was living in a care home. When Sobel died in 1987, he had been divorced and largely alone, yet even his harshest critics admitted that Sobel had played a crucial role in shaping Easy Company. His relentless pressure had driven the men together. In a strange way, their shared struggle against him forged the unity that later defined the company.